Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the buyer's due diligence section. I've had a lot of questions about this lately, and I think this is good timing for it. So let me share these contracts. Okay, so they're broken up. This is the REPSI. So in the REPSI, we're going to talk about Section 8 and Section 10. We're specifically talking about the due diligence conditions. 8.1 is how it's defined for us. Buyers obligated to purchase property is or is not conditioned upon buyer's due diligence. As defined in Section 8.1 A below, this condition is referred to as due diligence condition. I would never really recommend doing an offer where you don't have some sort of a due diligence. If you're competing with multiple offers, I wouldn't suggest not having a due diligence and clicking is not. The main reason is because there's other things in this section that kind of protect the seller, especially if you're going to do any tests or any inspections. Even if the buyer you represent is saying, I'm not going to do any inspections, I still would have some kind of a condition on there. Even if it's like, hey, for 2 days, I'm going to do a due diligence, give them an opportunity. Even if they don't take advantage and do inspections, they can still have the condition there. So I would recommend not checking is not, just shorten the time frame if you're wanting to compete with somebody. Due diligence items. So this is what can be done during the due diligence period. Section A, buyer's due diligence consists of buyer's review and approval of the seller's disclosure, Section 7. So this section right here, right above it, we've got all of these different things that the seller should be providing. So this is an opportunity for the buyer to review those documents. So when I go back to it's not conditioned, typically a buyer is looking at it saying it's not conditioned and I'm not going to do inspections, but they still would want to review the CCNRs. They still want to review the lead-based paint. They still want to review all of those documents. That's part of due diligence. Or any other tests or evaluations for the property deemed necessary from the buyer. So that's talking about physical conditions, hazardous, environmental issues, anything has to do with the house that they're going to disclose to us. That gives you an opportunity to review those. B talks about the right to cancel or resolve objections. So this is what we can do. Buyer determines in buyer's sole discretion the results of the due diligence are unacceptable. Buyer may either, one, no later than due diligence deadline referenced in Section 24B, cancel the REPSI is by provided written notice to the seller. Okay, so there's really 2 steps there. The biggest key here is buyer's sole discretion. Do they actually have to do an inspection to have a reason to get out? No. Do they have to give a reason to the seller on why they're backing out because of due diligence? No. In fact, I would recommend that if you do cancel based on due diligence, that's about as much information as you would provide. Obviously, if there's a specific reason that the seller can fix, you can give them that information. But if they're just not interested in buying it, they can still back out of the property because it's based on sole discretion. Then they have things they have to do. Okay, one is they have to cancel the REPSI by providing written notice to the seller. Okay, written notice, they have to be able to send that to them and say, okay, we're going to cancel. We're going to cancel this. We've seen it where somebody is just saying, oh yeah, we're going to cancel it, but yeah, they haven't officially canceled, and the seller is acting as if they did cancel. So the buyer says, yes, we're going to cancel. They haven't canceled. The seller says, okay, we'll put it back on the market. We're going to start marketing it. Until you get an official cancellation on the from the buyer, you can't continue marketing it because you're still under contract with them. So written notice whereupon the earnest money deposit shall be released to the buyer without written requirement for their authorization from the seller. And then, or no later than the due diligence deadline referenced in Section 24B, resolve in writing with the seller any objection buyer has arise from the buyer's due diligence. So we really have 2 choices. One is we're going to cancel, or 2, we're going to resolve it. It's pretty simple. One of the things that I look at for your due diligence that a lot of people aren't really using your due diligence for is the due diligence period is to solve all the problems. Occasionally, some of those problems have to be solved before settlement, but the idea is solve them before the due diligence deadline, and then you don't need to put it in the contract. So if a buyer is saying, well, I don't want to put some verbiage in the contract, I don't want to see the lender doesn't want to look at some of these things. If you can get it done before the due diligence deadline, it never has to be in the contract, because then the buyer can go back, inspect it, make sure they're 100% fine with it, and it never actually has to go in the contract. But if you're going to go past the due diligence deadline to protect your client, everything has to go into the contract. So what I've seen is that we're doing the negotiating outside of the contract, which is 100% fine. You can send an email out, say, these are the things I want you to fix. These are the things I want you to do. Seller can come back and say, I'm going to fix all these things. That's fine. If they can fix it before the due diligence deadline ends, great. That's as far as we need to go. They fixed it and we're good. If they don't fix it, whatever is left, then we need to be putting it back in the contract. So that's what I'm seeing. And I've even seen some agents send over an email and say, hey, just agree to this, sign this. We're gonna keep this agreement, but yet there's the REPC and the lender doesn't see it. So that's problematic when there's a lender involved. I've seen it where it's a cash deal and somebody's agreed outside of the contract for that because it's a cash deal. Well, everybody part of the contract understands it, so I'm okay with that if everyone knows. But if we're keeping it from somebody in the transaction, then we've got a problem. And so typically it's keeping it from the lender, and that's where you can start with an email, you can start with a phone conversation. But if you're going to pass the due diligence deadline, make sure you're putting it in the contract. And I'll show you where we can put that in the contract. C right here, failure to cancel or resolve objections. If the buyer fails to cancel the REPC or fails to resolve in writing with the seller any objections buyer has arise from the buyer's due diligence, that's provided in 8.3B, which we just talked about, buyer shall be deemed to have waived the due diligence condition. So this comes in handy when we're getting up to our deadline of 5 p.m. Mountain Time. If it hasn't been resolved and we pass that deadline, then it's as your buyer, the buyer has said, I'm okay with everything and I'm moving forward. So if they're not okay with it, you have to do something before that deadline, which is 5 p.m. on whatever date you choose. You have to do something. Otherwise, it's basically saying we're waiving this contingency and we're not going to pull out, except for in section 2, 8.2, earnest money deposit shall become non-refundable after that time. Okay, so that's something to really keep in mind is all of these things that need to happen with the property, all the inspections, everything they want to make sure they're comfortable moving forward has to be done before the due diligence deadline. Okay. Another question we have on the REPC and that kind of relates to the due diligence is section 10. 10.1 talks about the home warranty, but section 10.2 is right here, the condition of the property, buyer acknowledgements. Buyer acknowledges and agrees that in reference to the physical condition of the property, buyer is purchasing the property in as is condition. Okay, I've seen people write in their contract, the home is sold as is. It already says it in the contract. It is being sold as is. This is the condition without express or implied warranties of any kind. So it's already in there. It's already protecting your seller. B, buyer shall have during the due diligence period, reference in section 8.1, an opportunity to complete, inspect, and evaluate the conditions of the property. And C, if based on the buyer's due diligence, buyer elects to proceed with the purchase of the property, buyer is relying wholly on the buyer's own judgment and that of any contractor or inspector engaged by the buyer to review, evaluate, and inspect the property. These provisions, sections 10.2, shall survive closing. Okay, so in this particular case, we're looking at it and we have all the opportunities to inspect, and then once it's over, it's over. So and then the home is sold as is. So if there's something like, oh, I thought this was working, but it's not working, and we want to go back at the seller, and the seller had no idea if it was working or it wasn't working, we're still buying it as is, so we wouldn't be able to actually go after the seller. The question I get an awful lot about this is, oh, I knew the seller knew about this. There's no way they couldn't know about this. Well, the problem isn't did they know or did they not know? The question is, can you prove that they did know? And if you can, well, then yeah, they're going to be liable for it. But if it's they said no and I said yes, well, I have to prove that they actually knew. And that's the burden of proof is on me, not on the seller, that they didn't know. Because basically they're saying, I didn't know anything about this. That's where usually the problem comes in with this as is condition, is we are assuming that if it's something that they should have known or they did know, that they automatically should have disclosed that. And if they knew it, great. Yes, they should have disclosed it, but we have to prove that they did know it. Okay, so along with the REPC, so once you have the REPC, I'd recommend we have this document here, the buyer's due diligence checklist. Okay, this particular form here is one that's required that we have to have for the office. Is a very awkward contract to have them sign after your due diligence period is over. If your client is going to waive their due diligence period and you're going to submit an offer, I would actually have them sign this prior to committing to I'm not going to do my due diligence on this property, because this is one that's going to protect you as an agent, where you're basically saying buyers advise not to rely on the company or any of the agents of the company for determining regarding the physical or legal conditions of this property. Okay, so we get ourselves in trouble when we start going into the area of being the expert. Okay, if I go to an inspection and my client asks me, they said, hey, the furnace is where it unconditioned, like what's the word they use in the inspector? It's like the lifespan of the air conditioning is unknown. It could break down tomorrow. And then the buyer freaks out because they're like, whoa, what's going on with the inspection? And you go in and go, that looks pretty good to me. I don't think you're gonna have a problem. Now all of a sudden you brought yourself back into the problem. So what I would suggest is you have them sign this form, which really goes through everything: building codes, rentals, hazardous, radon, surveys, flooding, like all of these things are covered. And really when it comes down to it is it's basically saying, I'm not an expert in these areas. If you have a question about these areas, feel free to go to a professional, have an inspector, talk to somebody, talk to your tax advisor. That's the direction I would go. Even if you do kind of know, I wouldn't necessarily open myself up to that liability by saying, yes, this is what it is. Okay, the one I see a lot happen is on taxes and income and consequences and stuff. A lot of agents will say, "Oh yeah, you get a $250,000 grace if you're single and 500,000 if you're not." Well, everybody's in different tax situations, and maybe that doesn't apply to them. So I wouldn't necessarily give that kind of advice. And then they're going to accept it, the receipt, and acknowledge the buyer. Basically, they're just saying, I further understand that I have the right to include any or all of these above issues as a condition of my offer to purchase any property. So when I read that, that tells me that I should be presenting this to them prior to writing an offer, prior to getting an accepted offer. A lot of times we'll wait until after, which I would suggest just don't wait until after your due diligence. Because if you have eliminated your due diligence and then you're coming back and trying to collect forms, they're going to say, wait, I didn't have the right to inspect it. You didn't tell me I had the right to inspect it. And if they don't sign it, well, that opens you up as an agent. Okay, so those are the forms. Now let's say that we do have a problem. And if I'm going too fast and you have questions, just unmute and ask. But resolution of due diligence. This is an addendum that goes into the contract. There's different options that you can have. And this first section right here, buyer agrees to the following. Buyer check applicable boxes. Okay, this is one of those sections where you can actually click all three boxes if you want to. It doesn't have to be just pick one. You can have a combination of them. Okay, one is closing costs. Okay, Repsy shall contribute an amount of this being applied towards any and all of the following, and then it says lists of where it can go. And then this is a real big key because this is a question I get asked a lot. If in a prior addendum, the Repsy seller has agrees to pay any amount towards buyer closing costs, the amount shown in section 1 above shall be in addition to the prior contribution. Okay, so the confusion gets is, okay, the seller's already offered me $5,000 in concessions. Now I want another $2,000 in repairs. Do I put $7,000 in here? Or if I put $2,000 in here, am I only now getting two? This is where it corrects that. So the correct answer is closing cost here is $2,000. And then if you had five in the other one, now it's a total of seven. But if I put $7,000 in here, because I'm looking at it saying the seller is now giving me 7,000, well, now I'm actually getting 12 because I had five in the first and then I had seven. So we would have to fix that. So this is just specifically for the resolution of the due diligence. Okay, so there's closing costs. So I can put any amount in there that I want that I can use for those purposes. Number two, purchase price reduction. Okay, in some situations where it's not the repair that's important, it's more of the buyer just wants to get a lower purchase price so that their payment goes down, or possibly the ratios for their loan change so they can save a little bit of money. We might bring the purchase price down. So I might do a combination of, you're going to add $2,000 in closing costs and you're going to add $5,000 removed from the purchase price. So we all know that when you're doing a loan, you have a certain amount of closing costs you can use. Well, let's say that I've used them all and I can't ask for any more. So if I put another $2,000 in closing costs, the loan won't work because I've used too much closing costs. So in that scenario, I can't necessarily ask for more money, but I could reduce the purchase price and I could still get the property closed that way. So there's another option. Okay, the third option is repairs to be made by the seller. Okay, so now let's say that in this situation that they want to do some of the repairs, they don't want to do some of the big repairs, and we've used too much of our closing costs. Now I can do a combination of all three, where I can say seller's willing to fix these three things, they're going to pay for these two things, and I'm going to reduce the price by this. And I can do a combination of all three in order to make sure the deal works for my client. So you can do one, you can do two, you can do three, any one of them work. Okay. Now, once we get to section 3, section 3 has 3.1. Okay, this section right here in the middle. Okay, this one I get a lot of confusion on what it's actually asking. Basically, the easiest way to explain this is, what does your client want to do if the seller doesn't do what they say? Okay, now this is a scenario where the seller has agreed in the contract, I will do X. Okay, and now they come to the settlement and they decide that they're not going to do X. Okay, so either way, the contract says yes, they're doing the opposite. So if I took this contract to a judge and I said, this is what they said, and they haven't done it, the chances of the judge saying, oh, I'm not going to let this, it doesn't matter that the seller didn't do it, they're fine, they're not guilty of what you've asked, is pretty low. It's basically saying, I said I'll do this, I didn't do it. It should be a pretty easy conversation. So then you get to this section here and you say, well, what do I want to do as a buyer? I look at this as these are some of our remedies. Okay, number one is buyer may cancel the Repsy in addition to the return of the earnest money or deposits if applicable, except from the seller as liquidated damage, a sum equal to the earnest money deposits or deposit. If applicable, seller agrees to pay the liquidated damage to the buyer upon demand. Okay, so this is one option. It's basically saying Okay, this still is a big deal. You didn't fix it. I'm canceling the contract and I'm taking my earnest money back and I want you to match my earnest money. Okay, so it's basically saying that the remedy that I'm going to be okay with is I'm going to take the same amount of earnest money. So if you have $10,000 of earnest money, you get your $10,000 back. Seller has to give you $10,000 back. The deal is dead. It's done and you can move on. Okay, that's what that option is saying. This isn't necessarily a great option if your earnest money is $1,000 and the seller decides to walk, because now you're going to get your $1,000 back and their $1,000 back. This is telling you that if you're checking this box, your remedy is that you're going to take that earnest money. Okay. B, buyer may complete the purchase and then pursue any other remedies under the law after closing. The terms of this section 3 inclusive shall survive closing. So this scenario is my buyer is going to actually complete the purchase. And after we complete it, so that my buyer now owns the home, my buyer is now able to go after the seller for the damages that, because they didn't fix the unit. So I get a lot of people ask me, I was like, well, my client doesn't want to sue them. And I don't really want to say, yes, go sue them, but I want you to understand that what the buyer is presenting is, it's not, I have to plead my case. It's seller said they would do X, seller didn't do X. It's a pretty easy opportunity for you to go after the seller if that is something that was important to you. I mean, obviously it's important if you put it in the contract. So it's just something you have to keep in mind, that one is you're closing, one is you're not closing. You have to decide which one you would like to pursue. Okay, the last one is 4.4. It's just section 4, due diligence condition. Okay, upon acceptance of this addendum, buyer's objections to the due diligence shall be deemed resolved and the due diligence period is waived by buyer unless checked below. Okay, so this means that if I don't check this box here, that as of when this is accepted, my due diligence deadline is over. It's done. I've waived that condition. Okay, so the question is, my due diligence is, I did the inspections today and I don't have my due diligence deadline is not till next week. If I don't want to do any more inspections, I'm perfectly fine moving forward, then great. Just don't check it, move forward, your due diligence is now over. But if next Tuesday you decide, oh, I'm going to back out because I just don't want, I found another home, or things aren't working out, well, your due diligence deadline is now waived. So you can't back out because of the due diligence. Even though your deadline said next Friday, if you don't check this box, then now your due diligence is resolved and is now waived by your buyer. So if the deadline is today, then it's not a big deal. If it's next week, then you really want to ask your client, hey, do we want to waive this condition? And if they say no, then I want you to check this box, and you're going to check this box, which basically says we've resolved all of our concerns, but I'm not waiving my due diligence until next week, which means you could still do more inspections, you could still do more due diligence, you could still figure things out. So you don't have to waive your due diligence because you do this, but you do have to check that box if you're not waiving it. Okay, so hopefully that's understandable. All right, any questions about due diligence or canceling or how to handle your due diligence deadline?